Well, the clock is ticking down to tomorrow's inauguration of Donald Trump as the 47th President of the United States. The second coming of Donald Trump, if you like, as this will be the billionaire businessman's second time of occupying the White House in Washington, D.C. as the leader of the free world. What is it going to be like for Africa, foreign policy-wise, with Trump as president? Economically and politically, is Africa or Nigeria likely to fare any better with the second coming of Trump than what the situation has been with President Joe Biden and the Democrats? Well, for that's a $64 million question, we're now being joined by Dr. Suleiman Barnabas. He's a political sociologist and associate professor at the Faculty of Management and Social Services, Cosmopolitan University, Abuja. Good morning, and it's great to have you here on The Morning Show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Now, let's get straight into it. We do know what tomorrow is, very significant day, for the United States and the world at large. We're looking at the U.S.-Africa relations under Trump. During his first time, President Trump was criticized for his limited engagement with African nations, notably becoming the first U.S. president in recent history not to visit the continent. Now, given this context, how do you anticipate his second term will shape diplomatic relations between the U.S. and African countries, particularly Nigeria? Do you foresee a continuation of this disengagement, or might there be efforts to redefine the relationship?
Well, let me start by saying that with respect to Nigeria, it depends on how you look at it, because Trump, in his first tenure, was actually the first Nigerian president was the first person he spoke to, among African countries. And at the same time, he also invited the Nigerian president, that is President Muhammadu Buhari at the time, for a meeting in the US. So if you look at it from that perspective, you see that Trump actually has Nigeria in mind. And of course, any leader who is going to deal with Africa should have Nigeria in mind. Unfortunately, the opportunities that Donald Trump gave to Nigeria at that time was somehow not used positively. For instance, when President Muhammadu Buhari visited the US, I think that Donald Trump wasn't very much impressed with the manner of conversation, the intellectual engagement. We saw that from the very unpresidential statement that he made about our president at the time. Also, you also look at the fact that the ambassador of Nigeria to the US at the time was someone that was quite old, over 80. And Donald Trump didn't see that as very impressive. So what happens going forward would actually be determined by the level of engagement that the Nigerian leadership, the Nigerian president, would have with the American leadership under Donald Trump. And that, again, falls with us. We know very well that Donald Trump has been described as a transactional leader. To that extent, he would want to see what Nigeria, what Africa will be bringing to the table, not just a dependent continent or nation in terms of Nigeria, but he will want to see what is it that Nigeria has to offer. So a lot of issues will come to the table for which, would eventually determine the extent to which he would want to engage with Nigeria.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Barnabas. But I'd like you to speak further on what the expectations should be, and now that Trump is returning to office, given the fact that a lot of people tend to want to give him some credit, particularly in the area of fighting insurgency and terror in Nigeria. People will say that which was denied Nigeria during the Obama regime, it was Trump that finally approved for Nigeria to have access to military, to weapons and things like that. We see now that we're told that President Trump has invited at least 2 Nigerian people to his inauguration tomorrow. I think Pastor Kumuyi is one of them. And then the gentleman, gospeler, his name escapes me now. Nathaniel Bassi, will also be part of the immigration. Is this something that, is this a good signal that in spite of everything that has been said about Trump, not being pro-Africa, not being pro-black, that he might, maybe on the basis of conservatism and Christian values, maybe Nigeria might stand to benefit something. After all, again, given what he did towards the fight against insurgency in his first time in Nigeria. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I like I said earlier, that people who have accused Donald Trump of not being pro-African may be doing so out of some specific issues, not the general issues. For me, his decision to invite private citizens and the person of, and of course, global citizens, the person of Pastor W.F. Kumuyi of Deeper Life and Nathaniel Bassi, tells us that Nigeria and Nigerians actually are in the good books of Donald Trump. However, it is not sufficient for such micro-level, relations to actually transcend into macro-level relationships. It's unfortunate that, you see, relationships at this level comes with a whole lot of reciprocity and mutual respect. It's unfortunate that at this, as we speak, I don't think that Nigeria has an ambassador in the US, and that's not good enough. W.F. Kumuyi is not going to speak on the behalf of Nigeria, for to Donald Trump. Same thing with Nathaniel Bassi. That is purely a religious decision, informed by his pro-evangelical position, talking about Donald Trump. So I agree that Donald Trump's presidency will bring a lot of good to Nigeria and even to Africa if Nigeria, the Nigerian leadership, the presidency, is strategic enough to ensure that all that they would want to gain from Donald Trump presidency are put on the table. The lobbying that is required, is done so that the support that we need will be provided. I have no doubt that Donald Trump has, a lot of, he doesn't like terrorists. He doesn't tolerate them in any way. So when he finds worthy partners who are ready to deal with terrorism, he will definitely support, and he did that in his first tenure. I also believe that we even have a better opportunity now to engage him, considering the fact that democracy in West Africa particularly seems to be receding. Seems to be losing its weight. So if we properly engage Donald Trump and his leadership, he will definitely give the necessary support in that regard. But don't forget that the man is not ready just to throw money anyhow. He's not ready to waste his support. He wants to see the seriousness of African leaders in being self-reliant in their policies, in their projects, to see that mismanagement is reduced, to see that there's seriousness in wanting to fight all the ills that America stands against, including human rights violation, including all forms of marginalizations and so on and so forth. So it is the extent to which the Nigerian leadership under President Muhammadu Buhari is ready to engage the Trump administration that will determine, the benefits we are going to get from that administration. And I have no doubt that we have a very good...
Dr. Barnabas, you mean under Ashwaji
Sorry,
Bola
under Ashwaji Bola.
Yeah.
Exactly. Sorry, under Ashwaji Bola. Exactly. So again, I have no doubt that we have a very, intelligent, very, knowledgeable Minister of Foreign Affairs in the person of Tuku. So if we use, Tuga, if we use his experience, and if the presidency is willing to engage its counterpart in the US, I think that the Donald Trump presidency presents a whole lot of opportunities for Nigeria to take advantage of.
All right, thank you so much for that fantastic submission. But I'd like to shift our focus now to, China's influence in Africa vis-a-vis U.S. Strategic interests. We do know that China's growing presence in Africa has been a point of concern for U.S. foreign policy strategists. While the previous administration acknowledged this, there was a limited concrete action to counterbalance China's influence. Do you anticipate maybe a more defined strategy from President Trump's second term to address this geopolitical challenge? And how should Nigeria, position itself amidst the strategic competition between these two superpowers, the U.S. and China?
Yeah, this is very, very important. Just a few days ago, we, woke up to the news that Nigeria has been accepted as, I think, a partner of BRICS. And you know very well that Donald Trump, even just upon election as the United States president in this second return, has come out to say that anyone who is going to follow the plans of BRICS to isolate the U.S., and avoid the dollar, that such countries will face sanctions from the U.S. under his presidency. And so if Nigeria, at this point, where the incoming president of the U.S. is saying BRICS shouldn't go the way they are planning to go, now we are aligning with BRICS, then that tells us that there's something for us there, negatively. So the influence, Nigeria must actually strategize. We must actually analyze to see whether or not we stand to benefit from our relationships with China or our relationships with the U.S. I think that Donald Trump will not be so bothered with what China does with Africa as much as he will be bothered with what Nigeria does with the U.S. If you look at his presidency, his foreign relations pattern in the first tenure, you will discover that he's more interested in relating with countries directly instead of talking about categorizing them as continents like Africa. And so to that extent, I believe that there are certain existing bilateral relations between Nigeria and China that the U.S. may not be able to stop. However, going forward, the Nigerian leadership must be strategic, must engage with the U.S. more, must also engage with China to the extent that our engagement with China does not jeopardize our engagement with the U.S. There's nothing wrong with relating favorably with China and also relating favorably with the U.S. But we must be careful with our partnerships, particularly with our decision to go with BRICS, considering the fact that the way the world order is today, BRICS tends to be going the way that the U.S. is openly opposed to. And so that has to do with how our foreign policy analysts and influencers will come together to decide on the path to take. But most definitely, Donald Trump would not tolerate any relationship with China, with Russia, or any other country for that matter that undermines its interest in Africa or in Nigeria, and that will see it as being disrespected by the countries involved, particularly Nigeria as we speak.
All right, I get your point clearly, but I would also like you to speak about another concern to many Nigerians who are living in the U.S. at the moment, or those who are even thinking of traveling. Anti-illegal immigration was one of the key points that Donald Trump campaigned on. And people think that from Tuesday, in fact, that's already been circulated in a section of the American media, that there will be a crackdown on illegal immigrants all across the U.S. Some people are already saying that it might start on Tuesday around the Chicago area. As you know, there are many Nigerians around the Chicago area, in Georgia, in Texas, all over America. What will be your advice to the Nigerian government, to the foreign ministry, and to the diaspora commission, which is headed by our sister, Madam Abike Dabiri, if it comes down to illegal immigrants being forcibly deported from the U.S. I use the word decidedly illegal, not just immigrant, because the Trump team has consistently clarified those that they have issues against. If we get to that point and Nigerians are affected, even though they might be illegally staying abroad, what approach do you think that the Nigerian government should take if this becomes a diplomatic row of some sort?
Well, I think that there's a precedence. I mean, in the first presidency of Donald Trump, he also deported a lot of illegal immigrants and put in place policies, made executive orders that restricted, that were not favorable to immigrants. Again, when you say illegal immigrants, there's no country that will have a way of trying to justify, that illegality. However, what the Nigerian government can do, working with the working through the foreign ministry and even the diaspora commission, is to see how they can actually have the list of those illegal immigrants and see how the government can engage with Donald Trump, because there are levels of statuses, I mean, for all of them there. If there are those that the country is willing and determined to deport, then of course our country can have a way of creating a safety net for them, bringing them back and seeing how they can get them engaged, properly in Nigeria, resettled in Nigeria, without having to suffer the ignominy of deportation, particularly back home here. But I think that there will be a lot of court cases, coming up. The unfortunate thing for most of those illegal immigrants today is that in this Donald Trump's second presidency, you have a situation where the Congress is under him, under his control, because the House of Reps is controlled by the Republicans. The majority leader in the Senate also is a Republican. So it will be easier for Donald Trump to have his way. And to that extent, Nigeria should also play its part. Like I continue to say, it's unfortunate that today we do not have an ambassador of Nigeria in the U.S. And that's going to be a drawback on whatever activities that needs to be done to ensure that our people there are protected. And so that's, some of the challenges that the indecision of the presidency here may have caused. Yeah,
that's correct, Dr. Barnabas, but that affects practically everywhere. All the ambassadors have basically been recalled, and I agree with you that it shouldn't take forever for ambassadors, to be appointed. But do you think that it will help Nigeria in any way, given that the special advisor that President Trump picked for Middle East affairs happens to be, shall we say, half a Nigerian, Dr. Bolus, who is an in-law, as you know, to Mr. President, to President Trump, but who lives in Nigeria, has worked in Nigeria for a long time, even though he's of a Middle East origin. But then he's also a Nigerian in some ways. He will be the special advisor to Trump on Middle East affairs. Do you think that that's an inroad into establishing some kind of relationship with the inner caucus of the Trump administration, given the fact, as you observe, that we do not yet have a substantive ambassador in the United States? Very quickly, please.
Yes, that's definitely not a minus. It could be a plus. But like I said, at the international level, even though there's a room for lobbying and all, but it's more of relationship between country A and country B, between Nigeria and the U.S. Of course, it could help, but it's not a guarantee. And you know very well that some of these people that Donald Trump has actually assembled are people who also reflect his values as far as the American First slogan is concerned. So while we have said that that could be a positive for Nigeria, let us not put all our hopes there. Let us do the right thing for our country. Let us also, be respectable in our approaches to doing things so that we do not always hope that it is the decision of other countries that will bring us out of our predicament.
Okay, let's, as we wrap up, very quickly touch on foreign aid and development assistance, because President Trump's previous administration proposed significant cuts to foreign aid, raising concerns about the future of programs like the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, for example, which has been instrumental in combating HIV/AIDS in Africa. With the possibility of such policies resurfacing, what impact could this have on Nigeria's healthcare initiatives, and how should the country prepare to address potential funding shortfalls? Very briefly as we start to wrap up. Thank you.
Well, we hope that does not happen. But if it does happen in terms of reducing aid to Africa and particularly to Nigeria, I believe strongly that if our leadership gets it right, we may not necessarily need the help of the US or any other country at that to revamp our infrastructures in the health sector, in the educational sector, and so on and so forth. What we need to do is to have a responsible, visionary leadership back home here that is responsible to the people, particularly in tackling the ills of our societies, in trying to also reduce, the cost of governance, which has actually been one of the major setbacks for our country. The resources that will help us manage our issues are there, if only they are properly managed, so that if at all we are going to get aid from other countries, it will just be a plus, not necessarily what we actually do need to help us thrive.
All right, then, thank you so much. We appreciate you.
So to put it, there's no substitute.
Yeah. Yes, you can land on your point.
Yeah, there's no substitute for... Yeah, I said the summary, therefore, is that there's no substitute for domestic responsibility in tackling and addressing our own problems.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your time on The Morning Show, and we appreciate having you on.